February 6, 2020. Jan Jairo Velázquez, known as Popeye, Pablo Escobar's most loyal sicario, lay die in a prison hospital in Bogota. He was 57, had terminal stomach cancer, had maybe hours left, and he called his lawyer to his bedside, handed him a sealed envelope, and said 7 words, "Open this only after I'm dead." The lawyer took the envelope, felt how light it was. Whatever was inside wasn't much. Popeye died 6 hours later, and when the lawyer opened it, he found a single piece of paper, 1 sentence in Popeye's handwriting, 12 words in Spanish that would trigger the biggest treasure hunt in Colombian history and reveal where Pablo Escobar had hidden billions that had been missing for nearly 30 years. The sentence read, "El dinero está, donde, nadie, mira, and las tumbas de los pobres." The money is where no one looks, in the graves of the poor. To understand why this revelation was so explosive, you need to understand the mystery it solved. When Pablo Escobar was killed on December 2nd, 1993, he was worth an estimated $15 billion, maybe more. Nobody knew the exact figure because Pablo's fortune was so vast, so spread out in shell companies and cash reserves that even he probably didn't know how much he had. He'd spent decades building the world's largest cocaine empire, had at one point controlled 80% of the global cocaine supply, moving 15 tons of cocaine into the United States every day at peak. Had made so much money he literally couldn't count it all, couldn't even store it properly. The famous stories say he lost 10% annually, roughly $1 billion a year, to rats eating bills and water damage in warehouses where money was stored in duffel bags because there was too much to fit in safes. $15 billion. In 1993 money, worth over $30 billion today. And when he died, everyone started looking for it. The Colombian government formed special units. The DEA sent teams. Rival cartels sent people to dig up his property. His widow Maria Victoria and children fled Colombia, but authorities seized most of what they tried to take. Banks froze accounts. Properties were confiscated. They found some of it. Houses stuffed with cash. Buried safes. $1 million caches in walls and floors. Apartments in Miami with money in air ducts. Storage units in Panama. Over the next decade, they recovered approximately $5 billion, maybe $6 billion. Which left a massive question. Where was the other $9 or $10 billion? Everyone had theories. Swiss bank accounts, buried in the jungle, hidden estates, smuggled out by family, found by rival cartel, spent on the war with the government. But nobody knew for sure. The missing billions became one of the great unsolved mysteries in criminal history. Treasure hunters searched. Journalists investigated. Documentaries were made. And for 27 years, from 1993 to 2020, the mystery remained unsolved until Popeye's deathbed confession. When Popeye's lawyer saw that sentence, saw those 12 words about graves and the poor, he immediately understood the implications, called the Colombian authorities, turned over the letter, and within a week, the Colombian government had organized an operation that would become one of the strangest archaeological digs in history. They were going to excavate graves in the poorest cemeteries in Medellin. Because Popeye's message, if it was real, if it was true, revealed something that was both genius and deeply disturbing about Pablo Escobar. To understand why Pablo chose to hide his money in poor people's graves, you need to understand how he thought. Pablo wasn't just a criminal. He was a strategist, a planner, someone who thought 10 steps ahead. And he knew that if he died, if the government killed him, everyone would come looking for his money. The police, the DA, the Colombian government, rival cartels, everyone. So he needed to hide his money somewhere that no one would think to look, somewhere that was protected not by security systems or guards, but by social taboos and cultural respect. And he realized no one disturbs the graves of the poor. In Colombia, in Catholic culture, in any culture really, graves are sacred. You don't dig them up. You don't disturb the dead. And the graves of poor people especially are untouchable because they're already forgotten, already neglected, already invisible to most of society. The rich have fancy mausoleums that get maintained and visited, but the poor get simple graves in crowded cemeteries that nobody goes to, that nobody maintains, that nobody remembers exist. They're the perfect hiding place because they're protected by poverty and by death and by the social invisibility of people who died forgotten. So between 1989 and 1993, during the final years of Pablo's life, when the pressure on him was intensifying, when the Colombian government and the DA were closing in, when he knew his empire might not survive, Pablo started hiding money in the graves of poor people in Medellin. Not just any graves, not random selection. Specific graves that he selected carefully based on very specific criteria. Graves of people who died decades earlier, whose families were long gone or had moved away. Graves that had no live flowers, no regular visitors, no fresh evidence of anyone caring about them. Graves in sections of cemeteries that were neglected and overgrown with weeds that cemetery workers rarely maintained, that were essentially forgotten by everyone except the dead themselves. And he did it systematically, methodically, with the same careful planning he applied to his cocaine operation, like he was making deposits in the world's strangest bank. Here's how it worked, according to later investigations by Colombian authorities and interviews with former cartel members who were involved in operations. Pablo would send Popeye and a small crew to scout cemeteries. They'd spend days walking to the poorest section, identifying suitable graves. Then Popeye would report back with a list. Pablo would review it personally, would make the final selection, would choose which graves would receive money and how much. Then the burial crews would go to work. They'd arrive at the cemetery at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. when there was no chance of witnesses, when even the homeless people who sometimes slept in the cemetery were in deep sleep, would bring shovels, waterproof containers, and of course the money, already bundled in vacuum-sealed plastic, sorted by denomination, counted precisely, would dig down about 4 feet into the grave. Not all the way. They had very strict orders never to disturb the actual coffin, never to disrespect the actual dead person. Just dig down far enough to create a hidden chamber in the earth above the coffin, a void space where containers could be placed. Then they'd place waterproof containers filled with cash in that chamber. Hundreds of thousands of dollars per grave, typically. Sometimes millions, if it was a particularly secure location. Then fill the hole back in carefully. Replace the dirt in layers so it would settle properly. Make it look completely undisturbed. Water the grave to help the grass regrow. Make sure there was absolutely no evidence that anyone had been there. And then came the most crucial part, marking the grave in a way that Pablo and Popeye would remember which ones had money. They developed a system of subtle signals that meant nothing to anyone else but told them exactly what they needed to know. Sometimes they'd plant a specific type of flower on the grave. A white rose always meant high-value cash. Sometimes they'd scratch a tiny mark on the back of the headstone, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Sometimes they'd place a small stone in a specific position relative to the grave marker. Little signals that were completely invisible to cemetery workers and visitors, but created a map for Pablo. Popeye kept a notebook, never written down completely, always in code, that tracked which graves had money and how much. The notebook was his insurance policy, his guarantee that if anything happened to Pablo, he'd be able to retrieve the money. Over 4 years, Pablo had an estimated $10 billion this way, spread across hundreds of graves in multiple cemeteries in Medellin. It was the ultimate long-term insurance policy. If he died, if his family needed money, they could retrieve it, but only if they knew which graves, only if they had the map, only if they had the code. And Pablo never told anyone the complete system. Not his wife, not his lawyers, not anyone, except, apparently, Popeye. Popeye was Pablo's chief sicario from 1982 until Pablo's death in 1993. Had killed more than 300 people on Pablo's orders by his own admission, was Pablo's most trusted enforcer. And according to what later emerged, Popeye was one of the people who actually buried the money, who dug the graves, who placed the cash, who knew the system. And when Pablo died, Popeye kept that secret for 27 years, through his arrest, through his trial, through his imprisonment. Never told anyone, never tried to retrieve the money for himself, just kept the secret, until he was dying, until he had nothing left to lose, until he decided that maybe the world should know. When the Colombian authorities started excavating graves in March 2020, they started with the cemeteries Popeye had been seen at in the early 1990s, according to surveillance records that had been archived and forgotten. Started with the oldest, most neglected section. Started with graves that hadn't been visited in decades. And within a week, they found the first cache. A grave in the Central Cemetery of Medellin. Belonged to a woman named Rosa, and now who died in 1971. Had no living relatives listed. Grave had been undisturbed for 49 years. And 4 feet down, above the coffin, they found a waterproof container. Inside, $2 million in U.S. currency, bundled in plastic, perfectly preserved, and a note. The note was typewritten, 1 page, signed P. Pablo Escobar, and what it said shocked everyone who read it. It wasn't instruction. wasn't directions to more money. It was a confession, a message from Pablo to whoever found the money. It said, "If you're reading this, I'm dead." This money was earned from cocaine, from poison that destroyed families in America and Europe. I know what I did. I know what I was. I hid this money in the grave of a poor woman because I am no better than the dead. Poor, I pretended to help. I built soccer fields and gave money to comunas because I wanted people to love me, but I was a killer. And when I die, I want the poor to have what I couldn't give them in life. My money. If you find this, give it to the poor. Build hospitals, build schools, feed children. Do what I should have done. P.E. The excavation crews found 27 more caches over the next 6 months, working carefully through the cemeteries that Popeye had been documented visiting in the early 1990s, according to old surveillance photos that had been stored in archives. Each grave containing between $1 and $5 million in perfectly preserved U.S. currency, still crisp and usable despite being buried for nearly 30 years. Each with a similar note from Pablo, always typed on the same Olivetti typewriter he'd used in the early 1990s, always on the same cream-colored paper from his office, always signed with his initials P in his distinctive handwriting. And the notes got more specific as they found more detailed, more personal, more revelatory about Pablo's state of mind in those final years when he knew the end was coming. In one grave in the Campos de Paz cemetery, Pablo wrote about specific community projects he wanted funded. The note was 3 paragraphs long, detailed instructions. Build a soccer field on Calle 45 between the church and the school. The kids there have nowhere to play except in the street, where cars hit them. I promised them a field in 1989 when I was campaigning and never delivered. Use this money to keep that promise for me. Make it good quality with real grass and lights so they can play at night. Put a plaque that says for the children of Medellin, but don't put my name on it. I don't deserve credit. In another grave, he wrote about his regret with painful specificity. Every dollar here is covered in blood. Americans died from my cocaine. Colombian police died fighting me. Good men with families. Innocent people died in my bombings, including a child on Avianca Flight 203 whose face I still see. I can't undo that. I can't bring them back. But maybe this money can save some lives to balance the ones I took. Maybe a child who would have died from disease will live because this money built a clinic. Maybe that's worth something. In another grave, found in June 2020, he wrote about his children. If my children ever find out about this, tell them I'm sorry. Tell them their father was a coward who knew what he was doing was wrong, but did it anyway because I liked the power and the money. Tell them not to romanticize me. Tell them I was a killer who happened to love them. Tell them to use their lives better than I used mine. One note in particular shocked investigators because it revealed Pablo's awareness of his own evil more clearly than any interview or confession ever had. Found in a grave in the San Pedro Cemetery containing $3 million, Pablo wrote what amounted to his own epitaph. I told myself I was Robin Hood. I told myself I helped the poor. But I only helped them so they'd love me, so they'd hide me from the police, so they'd protect me when the government came looking. I built soccer fields to create human shields out of children. I gave money to create loyalty that I could exploit. Everything I did, even the charity, was selfish. I am not a hero. I am a killer who wanted to be loved. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. The world is better without me. Use this money better than I did. Actually help people instead of buying their worship with blood money. By September 2020, the authorities had recovered $48 million from 28 graves. Based on Popeye's coded notebook found among his possessions, a small leather journal in numerical code. They estimated hundreds more graves contained money across 7 cemeteries in Medellin. The notebook listed coordinates, dates, amounts, and marking systems. The total hidden fortune could be $5 to $10 billion. And they made a controversial decision. Give the money to charity exactly as Pablo requested. Fund schools, hospitals, community centers in Medellin's poorest areas. Turn Pablo's blood money into something that actually helped people. But here's the question that haunted everyone involved in the excavations. Why did Pablo do this? Why did he write these confessional notes? Why did he specifically request the money go to the poor? Was it genuine remorse? Or was it a final manipulation, a way to control his legacy even after death? The truth, according to psychologists who study the notes, is probably both. Pablo was complex, was capable of genuine love for his family and genuine cruelty to his enemies, was capable of building soccer fields for poor kids and bombing planes full of innocent people, was capable of remorse and ruthlessness simultaneously. The note suggests that Pablo knew exactly what he was, knew he was a monster, knew he'd caused terrible suffering, and the hidden money in the graves was his attempt at redemption, his way of balancing the scales, his final act of charity that nobody would know about until after he was dead, which meant it couldn't be about his image or his reputation. It had to be about something else. Guilt, maybe, or conscience, or just the awareness that he'd wasted his life and his fortune on violence. Popeye's decision to reveal the secret in 2020 was itself controversial. Some saw it as a final act of loyalty to Pablo, fulfilling his wishes to have the money help the poor. Some saw it as Popeye's own attempt at redemption for the 300 murders he'd committed. Some saw it as manipulation, as Popeye trying to control how history remembered him and Pablo. Popeye himself never explained his reasoning, died 6 hours after handing over the envelope, left behind just that one sentence, that one clue, that one final gift to Colombia. Today, the money from Pablo's hidden fortune has built 12 schools in Medellin's poorest neighborhoods with modern classrooms, computer labs, and libraries serving over 8,000 children, has funded 3 medical clinics in the communas providing free health care to families who couldn't afford doctors before, has created scholarship programs for thousands of children to attend university, kids from the same neighborhoods where Pablo once recruited sicarios, has literally transformed parts of the city that Pablo once controlled through fear into communities with hope. And excavations continue. Every few months, another grave is identified based on Popeye's notebook. Another cache is found. Another note from Pablo is discovered, each one adding to the strange, complicated legacy of a man who was simultaneously Colombia's biggest criminal and, through this hidden charity, one of its biggest philanthropists. The most recent find was in November 2023, $4 million with a note from Pablo about his mother Hermilda. The graves themselves have become pilgrimage sites. People visit them, leave flowers, leave notes thanking Pablo for helping their community even 30 years after his death. It's disturbing and beautiful and complicated because the money came from cocaine, came from destruction, came from thousands of deaths, but it's also saving lives now, educating children, healing the sick, doing exactly what Pablo requested in those hidden notes. And that's the final mystery of Pablo Escobar. The fact that a man who killed thousands of people also hid billions of dollars in the graves of the poor with instructions to help them. The fact that his final act was both cynical and generous. The fact that he knew exactly what he was, a monster, and tried to be something else anyway, even if only in death, even if only through money hidden in graves that no one would find for decades. Popeye's revelation revealed more than just where the money was hidden. It revealed Pablo's final truth, that he was aware of what he'd done, that he felt something resembling regret, and that he wanted the poor to benefit from his fortune, because they were the ones who'd suffered most from his crimes. The money hidden in graves wasn't just a practical hiding place. It was a metaphor. It was Pablo's way of saying, I belong with the dead. I belong with the forgotten. And if my money can do some good, let it come from the same place I sent so many people, the grave.